Hello, guys. It's the towel day. It's a rare opportunity to talk about a babelfish-like stuff on the towel day. So, any Douglas Adams fans here? Yeah, okay. Where are your towels? You are not prepared for the interstellar hitchhiking.
Yeah, so if anybody has a towel, you can take it out safely now. It's okay with us. Otherwise, we will start talking about machine translation, and that's the topic that we know as well as interstellar travel, maybe even a bit better. We will be talking about machine translation and how to write a content which is feasible for MT. So let me start with two simple questions. Who has used at least once in your life DeepL, machine translation? And who was unhappy about the result?
Why?
Okay.
Why?
I work for a localization company, and we are implementing some huge engines to do the translations. And actually, it is, for me as a translator, I used to be the one, it is much easier to create my own sentence than to correct the one with MP.
Okay, we will get back to that.
And who has used Google Translate at least once? And who was unhappy about the results?
Looks like most of them.
Yeah. Okay, so it's one of my favorite phrases to test MT engines, so just enjoy. And I will now start with a really short story of machine translation. The history of MT is not that short after all, but I will try not to bore you. So it all started really long time ago in the 50s with so-called rule-based machine translation, no theory here. It's just like you learn foreign language in a course. That's how people started with machine translation, trying to teach a machine some grammar rules and the dictionaries. In short, it was not as effective as everybody wanted it. Then what came into the stage was statistical machine translation. It is like, well, I know there are some translators here, so I can say it's like computer-aided translation tools. It's taking big data in two languages, original translation, cutting into pieces and making the machine put them together in the right sequence. That's how Google used to work up to really not long time ago. So probably the most of your bad experience with Google Translate would be from that time.
Let me just tell one thing. In 1954, because that's like the milestone for the machine translation. This was the moment when the MT went very public. It was the experiment. It was translation of Russian message in 1954. Just if you remember the history, these were hard times. It was Russian message translated into English, and the TV presenter who talked about this on the news show was just very energetic. Was like, really, guys, in 5 years we will not need any translators in the world. Everything will be translated by this machine. And of course, the whole experiment was a little bit staged. It was fed the right dictionary. It was fed just very limited set of grammar rules. So the translation went very smooth, but in 1954, the press was like, we will not need any translators from Russian into English in 5 years. We are 2018, and we still need a lot of translators. So, and every time there is a breakthrough, somebody says, we will not need any translator, we will not need translators anymore. And after each such breakthrough, it turns out that translators are really needed, because we got so much volume that they are still needed. And you will see it's not as easy as you might think. That it's not the babelfish just that feds the sounds and produces the brain waves. It's a little bit more complicated.
Yes, pretty much the one thing that's here to stay since 1954 is the phrase that in 5 years no more translators will be needed. And what happened technically over the last 3 years, but in the market over the last year, it was neural machine translation. In short, it's like a child learns a new language. So doesn't read a book of grammar, doesn't use dictionary, doesn't use a corpus, bilingual corpus. Well, it does, but not knowingly. So this is a very simplified explanation how machine translation works nowadays. It's like a child is learning a foreign language just by hearing the native speakers. It's technically like statistical machine translation, but with a neural network in the back. So that's how DeepL works, the engine that made a big wow in Europe last year. That's how Google now works, but for reasons it's not always perfect anyway. And Wojciech will explain it shortly why. And that's how IBM's Watson machine translation works, and many other. So what's the difference, practical difference between statistical and neural MT? Neural MT is very, very, very fluent linguistically. It produces very natural sentences in the target language. I'm sorry. And here you can see some example how statistical MT used to work. I'm sorry, it's a Polish one, but here this part of sentence does not fit with the first part of sentence, and here a word is not translated. So that's what statistical MT used to do. If it didn't find a word, a good equivalent for a word, it just left it untranslated. So that's what you were used to with Google up to the last year. This is, by the way, not a Google example, but never mind. And here you have some neural MT to that, which produces fully grammatically correct sentence in Polish, and it is also more or less makes sense against the original.
And from the practical point of view, I was just blown away with the DeepL, which was the first neural MT deployment that translated from other languages, from the limited set of languages, into Polish, which probably most of you know is not the simplest language in the world. And I was just blown away by the fact that finally, after years of different companies promising that the language that you will get at the end will be fluent, it finally got the Polish right. So I was just amazed by the fact that I could have like a full paragraph of Polish, and I didn't have to correct a single ending, single inflection in this paragraph. Everything was correct. So that was the first time I've seen something like that as the output of the machine translation. That was English or Spanish or French into Polish, and usually you remember if you used Google, you saw in past that sometimes these translations were okay, a little bit clunky, a little bit, rough around the edges, the grammar was not right. It's no longer a problem. And NMT can handle the grammar and can handle the more complex languages.
All that's true, and how it happened, it's through deep learning, which I'm not going to explain here in detail. Over the coffee we can talk about it a bit more. And now, before we move to the next part of information, I will explain just very little of the machine translation mechanics so that you can understand us now and over the coffee, because we will be using a little bit of jargon. So what is the corpus? Corpus is a set of bilingual data that a machine translation, either statistical or neural, will be trained on. So this is not a dictionary, this is not a book of grammar, that's a set of human translation that somebody once created, and really large set. The best corpus is always high quality human translation. Translation memory, so-called. And the second expression you need to be familiar with, because we will be using it even if we don't want, but that's just so much in our brains. It's a training. That's the process of teaching MT engine how to convert phrases or paragraphs or sentences of source language into target language. And the training is based on corpus. So those two expressions we just need to be familiar with. So this is a very simplified example of how this works. That the target words need to be put in the right places.
Yeah, and that's just to tell you, this is a little bit oversimplified, because just to tell you, these guys from DeepL, which is the same company as the portal Lingui, I was doing that was indexing different translations in European languages. They had to build, to handle this task, they had to build a supercomputer that is based on Iceland. It's actually 23rd supercomputer in the world. That just tells you what kind of a computing power is needed for neural networks to take the hundreds of millions of words in a bilingual corpus and just crunch it into the numbers and then be able to create a neural network that will do that simple, switch between the languages.
Yes, and why in Iceland? Because also cooling is important. Okay, so let's move a bit to the practical part, how machine translation fits into real life, and then we will come to the part that refers directly to your work.
Okay, so how it fits into real life, because that's a wonderful innovation that just happened over a couple last years. First of all, it's a translation helper. It's a great translation helper, and it's not exactly the translation helper in a way that Jan described yesterday, because he said, oh yeah, I just extract the translatable strings from the SVG file, and I just send them to Google Translate, and then I insert translation back. And I say, okay, fine. It's a good idea to use machine translation, but what you have to do, you have to use a machine translation that is fit to purpose. Google is, as we call it, is the MT of mass distraction. They just crunched the whole internet. They just scanned, indexed everything that is available to Google, and they just converted it into engine. The problem is that it's broad engine. What if you want your translation to be accurate? You have to focus on your domain. We will have some examples showing what it exactly means later, and it's not unusual to have the translation wrong. That's why I just gave thumbs down to Jan, because if you want to go to your audience with the translation, you don't trust Google Translate. And if you read in a book, there are these guidelines for creating mobile applications, and they say, oh yeah, just create an application description, translate through Google Translate, and just drop it into App Store or somewhere else. Have you ever read descriptions of some apps in your native language, if it's not English, in App Store? How many of them were just, really? Really? Is that a proper description in my native language? And guys, this sort of description is the first info people get about your product. If it's wrong, will they use it? So fit for purpose. So the training, what we do in real life, we just grab as much of the corpus as is possible for a specific domain, and we just crunch it through MT. But again, it's not everything. It's not the whole internet. And what we do, I will just introduce another concept. MT, the results of the MT, if that's we always, for translation purposes, we always do the post-editing, it's a little bit different than translation. You need a little bit different mindset. It's not just translating, it's just fixing the MT output, and it's done by human post-editors. And if you value your content, if it's a content that goes directly to, that is important, that goes directly to your audience, if it's UI, if it's a description, if it's a help that is used all the time, it has to be checked by human translators, because the Babelfish version is not yet there. But still, there are some applications where you can use just empty output without any changes. And we had a lot of chat bots and bots in general discussion these days. Yesterday they were mentioned several times. And this is where the raw MT that is not edited in any way by human editors comes into play. Rahel mentioned that the cost of chat with the railway company bot is probably £1, while it would be £20 if it would be a human person working as an operator. Okay, it's 20 pounds for the human operator. How much would it be if that would be a human operator speaking in a language different than English? Probably it would be 30, 35, or even more. So you can imagine that the bots these days, they have to be multilingual. So they need to be connected to the MT engine that will simply translate the question in different language. Then they will answer, and the answer will be translated into foreign language again. So, and there is no time, and it's just economically not correct to go with the human translation or even human post-editing here. Another good example of where the MT without any modifications was used, these are less used documentation pages. And Microsoft was a very good example. I'm not sure if they still do that, but if you went to some less visited documentation pages by Microsoft in their knowledge base, you could see a disclaimer somewhere at the top or the bottom that this page was actually raw MT translated, and there was no human editor touching it. And Microsoft actually even changed the feedback question. It was no longer, do you like this article or something like that. They changed the question to, were you able to solve your problem using that article? So it was no longer a question about the quality of what you see on the screen. It was rather if the translation was accurate enough for you to solve your problem. And the other, I think it was Stefan Gens who told me that story yesterday, but this is the story that happens all the time. He told me the story about this, I think it was US company that bought Korean company. So they found out that there is like a whole stack of contracts with different companies, Korean companies, and they have to sort of prioritize their clients and prioritize their next moves. But all these contracts were in Korean, and they had no idea what's inside. They had no idea how to decide which contract is the most important one out of 150 that they had on the table. So what, again, the raw MT can tell you, can do the gisting, can tell you, and that's what we do in real life with Google Translate, that we want to know what this is about. We don't need a very detailed, very exact translation, very accurate translation. We need the idea of what this article is about. We need the idea what this contract is about, what we will need to fulfill the requirements of the contract. And this is what happens in real life these days as well, and it's gisting. And that's when Google Translate is not always the best idea, because we are entering the privacy settings. Have you ever read the privacy policy from Google covering the services like Google Translate? Has anyone read it? Ah, here you go. Here you go. There's no privacy with Google. All these MT engines, most of them are available as services with some API that can be accessed through API. And I think from these popular ones, the Google is the only one that says openly, we will always process your content in any way we like, even if you pay us. And so, you know, just pushing your contracts, which are very sensitive information, through Google Translate is not the best idea. There was a case last year where the translation company, some documents from, I think that was Statoil or Shell, I don't remember, one of these oil companies. They just landed in a translation agency, and they were supposed to be pushed through some MT engines, but unfortunately they landed in some server that was actually scanned by Google. So all this confident information from Statoil contracts ended up in Google. And people could actually search. There were, you know, list of people who are supposed to be fired, and, you know, all that interesting information. So we are entering the world of privacy settings, and most of these tools these days, they tell you, okay, we can be private. Okay, we are behind time. So it's a translation helper. How does it work? When Who translated anything? Like in a tool for translation? Okay, we got some people. So you know, we got translation memories. They simply show you what are the translations that were done in past. So the empty is just another suggestion that will pop up on the screen. Like here, we got example from this one, okay, from the Systran. That's one of the possible services. So this is another helper. This is another source of the potential translation that you simply edit. This Polish one is not the best one, but it's not also the worst one for this case. And what you do, you post-edit. So what's the concept behind the post-editing? That you want to get the raw empty output and move it to the human translation quality. And why? Because it's cheaper. Because it's faster. Because when you translate from scratch, you can do like 300 words per hour. These are like average numbers. I know people who can do more, but let's say 300 words per hour, it's a normal. So you do probably 2,000, 2,500 words per day. With a good empty engine, 1,000 words per hour, it's easily achievable, easily. So we can do 8 to 10,000 words per day. So it's just unbeatable if you want to compare to translate it from scratch. And to be able to get these 1,000 words per hour, you need a content that will work well with MT. And to work well with MT, this content has to be written in a little bit different way. You know, the natural language probably will not work that well. So there are some rules, and we just compiled some of these rules, and we also have examples what can happen if you don't follow these rules, and this is the fun part of the presentation. So Marta, you want to?
Yes.
I will just switch.
I will step in for a moment, and what we want to tell you, we are not the creators of empty engines. We don't. We are the people who deploy different translation and machine translation engines into the production environment. We compare which is the best one. We are responsible for feeding it with the right data, so for training with the right corpora. And at some point, we just figure out that whatever we do, the best we try to perform, the best choices we try to make, it's still, there are still some problems with the source, so with the content which is to be translated, which the machine just cannot overcome. So that's why we are here to speak to you a little bit and to ask you for a couple of favors. And let me tell you, even if you think that the content produced will not be machine translated, it may be at some point. Because nowadays everybody wants to make savings on money and on time. And Wojtek has explained that it may be raw empty, it may be post-edited, but even if it's going to be post-edited for speed and driven to final human professional quality, the machine translation output can be very different depending on several things that happen in the source. So here is a small example that writing sentences in a simple grammatical structure is a big difference to machine. So here is an example of how what's the difference. That's a Polish, that's an English-German example because I believe most of the people here know both of those languages. So here, if you make a very fancy, totally correct, but very fancy source construction, the machine will not make it. That's just, it's only a machine. It's DeepL, it's the best one probably for this language pair of the freely available on the market, but it still will not make it. On the contrary, if you put the sentence still in a correct but very clear and simple way, the machine does the job, I would say, quite well. Second thing is a dictionary, and here we will need to touch the concept of the corpora again. So to begin with, it's best to use words from a general dictionary, or if it's going to be a specialized text, use the words from a defined project dictionary. So machines are trained on a corpora which have some limitations of the terminology that they ever reach to. If you go to very, very rare words, very unusual, fancy, probably no machine will be trained properly on those. And another aspect in this is that a machine must be trained for the specific domain. So generally, no general purpose MT will do it well on medical data or technical data for construction works or things like that. But that's our job. I mean, that's the job of the translation companies and MT companies to train and use the right engine for the right purpose. That's one of our favorite example of wrong MT domain taken, security monitoring and eventing translated into monitorowanie zabezpieczeń i WKKW.
Wszechstronny konkurs konia wierzchowego. For non-Polish speakers, this is our competition of horse riding and horse jumping, and actually that's exactly this eventing word. It got multiple meanings. And
yeah, eventing WKKW is perfectly correct translation of eventing in the domain of horseback riding and races.
But not in domain of security.
Yes. So here it's not here in this case it's not probably a fault of a writer who created, but that's the misconception of the person who put wrong MT into wrong task. A bit more, and this will be especially about neural MT. Neural MT does not, as you saw in the previous example from me, neural MT does not copy unknown source terms into translation. It will not leave terms untranslated. It will try to guess the meaning. I told you, it's like a child learning a foreign language. So here is a cool example from Wojtek where how do you read it?
Dezinfication, removing of the sink. Just let's get it this way.
That's a technical term. Removing the zinc was translated into, well.
Yeah, you can see that it tries to understand the meaning. It tries to crunch down what it really this word is. And with statistical, if the word is unknown, then you just get a source word copied. With neural, it tries to add the meaning, and sometimes it fails because it looks like probably on this corpus, this dezinfication was similar to some other word that had meaning of anesthesia, so it ended up as znieczulenie, which is not a good way to translate.
So assuming that we are all aware that the content may go to MT someday, it's extremely important to define a terminology and stick to this terminology.
That's my favorite.
Yeah.
That was the extract from some automotive content. I think that was the service manual or some computer showing the service manual on screen, and actually that was very poorly created MT. And you can see that it just didn't know the words from the automotive domain. So the French is not the best one here as well. You can see there are no accents at all. So you can see that the camber, probably you know what is the camber. This is how the wheels are adjusted. So the adjustment of the camber was just translated as a carrot, which would be really strange for a guy in a workshop that would just say that you have to remove the carrot from a car, right after you repair the body. So it's like, okay, where are the carrots?
So if you happen to hear that machine translation that's for fellow translators in this room and also for tech writers and whoever, if you hear that machine translation for a particular purpose is very bad because it picks wrong terminology, that's alert that probably that's not bad MT, it's MT on bad training data, so on wrong corpus. Well,
that's another one from the same source.
Yes.
Inflatable duck. Immobilize it with a pigeon. So you see, this is what happens when you use some very specific vocabulary that is not converted in a process of building and training MT engine. So this for you, this can happen if you start using very the terms, especially from a very narrow domain, that are not defined for your project and that are not defined for your content, and somebody tries to build MT engine for that content to get translation cheaper. So you may end up with some really, really strange things.
Okay, so I think enough with the terminology and a little bit about grammar. Write sentences that are grammatically complete and write sentence, at least in English, that use articles to identify nouns. That's a very simple one over DeepL, where it defaulted open port to offener port, but open the port to offenen Sie den port. So depending on what you're trying to say, just think that there may be some very primitive engine sitting over there, and if you don't give a clue, it will not have a clue.
And the length of the sentence. This is data taken from Autodesk. They were so kind that they published results of their experiment with machine translation. What you have here is these lines, these trends are. This is the efficiency gain when you use MT. This is in comparison to translating from scratch. And you can see that depending on the length of the sentence, you get bigger or lower gain. And around 20-something words, this is like the good length of the sentence. If it's shorter, sometimes they are shorter. But if it gets longer, then things get complicated, both in translation, but especially for MT. It might take much more time to do the post-editing on a long sentence because it is more complicated, and it will not be as translated as well as the shorter one.
And one more simple thing: a person could probably a human would translate a sentence with such tiny spelling mistake without even thinking of it. But a machine got totally misled by just one extra S here. So spell checkers all of a sudden became much more important.
So the question to you again, do you use any tools that actually control the language? I'm not talking about the technical aspect, about the tagging, to control the language of the content that you write. Does anyone use tools like that? Okay, and can you just briefly tell, because we are running out of time, what are these tools? Excuse me? Okay. Acrolinks, okay. Excuse me? Okay. So, yes, this is the way to go. What you can do, there is a group of tools. There's Acrolinks, there is HyperST, there is a language tool. What they do, they simply, you define the set of rules, and they enforce these rules on the content that you write. So you can simply tell them, okay, this is the terminology that we use, and Acrolinks actually is great about terminology. It's absolutely fantastic. It is even able, just to spot the new terms, and you can just create a workflow for approving these terms, and it's just fantastic. And that's actually from the screenshot from Acrolinks. You can see that you can have overused phrase, deprecated term that shouldn't supposed to be here, deprecated phrase, and so on and so on. It can control the complexity of your language, and all these tools you can set up in a way that your content will be much easier to read and understand by the machine translation engine that will translate it later. Of course, it will also be simpler for readers. It will also be simpler for translators. But the goal here is just to make the rules simpler so the MT engine, which is the machine, can understand it better. And that's the example, which is like, yeah, this came in actual document when you have control, revision, Prüfung, Bemerkung, Untersuchung, so many terms. And the question is, they might mean like two things, two actual concepts and ideas, but there is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different words used for probably around 2 ideas.
The idea of control that's the source. That's the source that our fellow translator just has come across recently and was showing us.
Yeah, and things like that, they can be caught very early. by these tools. So, how to write for Mr. Robot?
Generally, like for people, for human translators, professional translators, only that, remember, a machine will never ask questions like, what did you mean? And how many versions of control are actually the same thing. So I don't want to be impolite with saying garbage in, garbage out, but that's about the truth about MT. So if it's inconsistent on source side, it will be definitely even more inconsistent on target side and so on. And a simple typo will just mislead it totally. Couple of resources that we were using were the controlled language optimized for uniform translation. Of course, simplified technical English, which I bow to every single day. And IBM globalization design guidelines, which also tell the authors, even long before MT deployment, how to write consistently.
And there's one more added, and it's we heard about it yesterday, and it's a just push it. It's a plain language. Yep, that's another good idea. That helps a lot. And another important thing, when you translate your content through MT or generally translate your content, talk to your provider. Because the worst thing that can happen is that people who actually do the translation or post-editing, that they just fix the same errors all the time because they just get frustrated. Just ask them to collect the feedback, to collect the patterns, and then just go back, sit with your MT provider, and see if it's a problem with the source. Maybe there are some easy ways to fix the source, to change something, change the phrasing, change the way you write the content. That will result in much better MT translation. And then you can simply ask your MT provider to just retrain the engine so it will learn the new things and will just perform better in future. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. Thank you, Wojtek. Guys, questions? Oh my, okay. Okay.
Hi, I'm Basia. I'm a content writer and translator as well. And I believe that MT is still a very controversial topic among translators. And coming back to what you said, that already some time ago, people were foreseeing that translators would be obsolete in 5 years. Do you have any idea about whether translators will become obsolete eventually, or will there ever always be a human factor needed?
I would say that in the near future, nothing. Well, the change is the following: that very simple content and very low quality, low cost translation, this is absorbed by machines, and well, this happens. And also a lot of work goes to machines where no human translator would fit anyway, because translating chatbots in real time at no cost is not an option for a human. Translating like products in online shops where nobody wants to pay for 20 languages anyway, and the clients are satisfied with the low quality of translation, there is no job for you anyway, because nobody ever wanted paid translators for that. 10 years ago, those shops would be in English only or in Chinese only, and you would just click over it if you like the product on the picture. So this job would not go to human translators anyway. So those jobs are taken over by machines. And in the rest of the industry, so far, localization industry is just growing. You want your smartphone apps in your local language even if you know English. That's the fact. And it applies to games and to everything. So far, translators still have lots of work to do. It's just becoming a bit different with all the MT used as Wojtek was showing it, used as just another type of proposal.
Yeah, and it's a simple calculation. Technical writers and generally people produce the growth in the content, it's much higher in the last 10 years than the natural growth of the translators pool. So, the difference is huge. It's like the content growth is exponential, and we don't, increase the number of people on Earth in an exponential way, which applies to the number of translators as well. So we have some translators, but they are just not able to keep up with the volume of the content that you produce.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry, but we have to finish here. A joke? Okay. Okay, here's a joke. We want the joke before the break. And if I may, in the meantime, I know that some of you guys wanted to visit the exhibitions here at Manga yesterday, and it wasn't possible. It's fixed now. The only thing that you need to do is go to the reception in this building or the other building with your badge. They will give you a free ticket. And you'll need to do it each time you want to see the exhibitions, okay? So today it's open. I'm sorry for it not being available yesterday. And for the joke?
Okay, just to answer your question, there still be a huge need for translators as we have the localization, which is, we really need to have those translations based on the local market. And second of all, transcreation. This is a great idea, and we always would need people to do so. And the joke. So in one of the translations for the automotive industry, there was this sentence, which you probably see in your cars. And in English, the source is distance to empty. And in Polish, this was odległość do wypróżnienia. Which literally means, how much time do you need to shit?
Yeah, nice one. Okay, coffee break. Thank you. Thank you, Marta. Thank you, Wojtek.